Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an NPC bodybuilder. Today's guest is Jasen Kohli. Jasen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Super excited to have you on. Just like I said before we hit record, you've had a pretty successful season up to this point in terms of competition. You got some big goals ahead. So I'm really excited to chop it up with you, talk some of the shows you've already done this year and see what you've got going on later this year. But before we kind of get into all that, I want to ask you, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders, Jasen, of all time?
I would say my number one favorite is Jay Cutler. He was the physique that I looked at when I was younger, I looked at and I would say like I could aspire to look like. He was a really good role model as an Olympian. And then every interaction I've ever had with him in person now, and even last week when I competed in a show, he's always a really good guy. He always takes the time out of his day to talk to you. He's just a good dude, really inspirational, really cool, really down to earth. As far as other bodybuilders, I think this one's a little different than most, but Sergio Oliva, I have a really close personal relationship with him. He's a really, really good guy. Some people get the idea that he's like a little harsh on social media, but in person, he's the nicest guy in the world. I'm really good friends with him. So I really like Sergio. And then obviously his physique is amazing. And I love what he's doing in the IFBB. He's very honest, very open about everything. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. And beyond that, I mean, Nick Walker's a really good pro that I admire because he's my age. He's a freak of nature. He works really hard. I think those guys are like my favorites right now.
Excellent. All right. So Jasen, at what age did you start lifting weights? And then why did you start lifting weights at that age?
I started lifting around when I first started lifting weights was about 13 years old. And that was just for football. My dad, my stepdad got me into sports really young, and I really enjoyed football, and I was a really skinny kid, and he got me into it.
Excellent, man. Okay, so I kind of like to use that last question there, Jasen, in terms of what age you started lifting weights, to kind of transition into just getting the guests' backstory a little bit more, kind of getting into childhood. So if you don't mind sharing with myself and the listeners, just talk about where you grew up, talk about your childhood a little bit. You mentioned football, talk about maybe some of the other sports you played, talk about any like role models, positive influences. We'll stop right up, into high school, and then we'll transition from there.
Yeah. So I was actually born in Chandler, Arizona. I only lived there maybe for about 2 years. And my biological dad and my mom moved to San Diego. My biological dad is from Greece. He was born and raised in Greece. And my mom is from the United States. They both worked on a cruise ship. They met each other when they were really young, like 20 years old. They hit it off. And they got married, and then my dad was able to move to the United States. And everything was good. They moved to San Diego. I think when I was about 5 or 6 is when they started having problems, and then they divorced. My biological dad is awesome. I still I talk to him all the time, hang out with him. But they just didn't get along well. So they divorced, and my mom took care of me and my middle brother for a couple years, up until my stepdad got in the mix, maybe when I was 10 or 11. And my stepdad has owned gyms all his life, so maybe like 10 gyms. And that's what really got me into kind of the bodybuilding scene. I'd always go with them to work, especially when school wasn't in. And he'd just give me magazines and stuff, and I'd see all these monster dudes when I'm like this little kid. I'm like, wow, like this is so impressive. And it was something I looked at and I was like, this is really cool. Like, this is different, And I was always kind of a kid that liked to be a little different. I like playing video games. I was a video game kid. I like playing outside. I was really into animals too, like animals, bugs, stuff like that. I had tons of reptiles when I was younger. So that was a big thing I was into. I had like a 3-foot monitor lizard, a couple like leopard geckos and iguana. So I was really into stuff like that. So just stuff that was different to people, you know. I think bodybuilding kind of hit that niche on the head for me it got me into something like that. I started playing football when I was like right before high school, so like 7th grade. So I think that would be like 11 or 12, and it was just like a league, like little kids league. So it'd just be like age and weight. My dad loved that. He'd come to all the practices. He'd help me practice, and he'd help me train. But what I started to realize is that, you know, once I put on the pads, I was really, really skinny. I mean, at my height now, I was probably 110 pounds. So I was getting hit hard. I wasn't really good at tackling. I was kind of scared to tackle people. So my dad was like, let's get you in the gym and put on a little bit of weight. I was like, okay. So we started going like early in the morning, maybe like 6 in the morning. You know, I'm still 7th, 8th grade. So like, it's pretty early for me. And I would go in, work out, and I started to really enjoy it after a while. And he taught me how to train. We'd always work out together. And it was a good transition to what I eventually would get into bodybuilding later on. But I've been lifting weights for a long time. So I think it was like 12, 13 years old is when we first started doing that.
Love that, man. So, it sounds like your stepdad, is it fair to say that he was like really the biggest influence on you as a young person, or was there somebody else?
Absolutely. My stepdad, his name's Jeff. He was my biggest role model. He was my biggest influence for everything. I mean, he really changed the course of my life in in the direction that I was going. Not that I was going in a bad direction, because, you know, he always took care of me. I was always kind of a good kid. I never got in trouble or anything. But he changed the course of what I would become today. You know, he really inspired me. He was always owning a business. You know, he was always staying in really good shape, and he was a monster when I was younger. I remember his forearms being like that big around. And he wasn't a bodybuilder or anything. He just lifted weights just because he enjoyed it. But yeah, he was the guy that I really looked up to, and I always wanted to make proud, and was yeah, along those lines. Yeah.
Now you said your stepdad Jeff, he owned gyms and stuff, and he'd give you magazines to read. Do you remember any of like those early bodybuilders that you saw maybe on the cover or in some of those magazines? Do you remember any of those guys? If so,
yeah.
who were they?
Oh yeah. So around that time, I would say it was 2006, 2007, like kind of in that area. And that was when like the Muscle Tech was really big. So like you saw the Muscle Tech ads. There was Dexter Jackson, Phil Heath was just coming up, Jay Cutler, Melvin Anthony, Branch Warren was really big back then too. Kind of like those guys, like Victor Martinez, Dennis Wolf, like those guys were coming out. Those were like the guys that I looked at that I was like, wow, like those physiques were just insane to me. I think Marcus Roll was still even competing back then. But I like the big freaky monster guys. And, you know, back then men's physique and classic physique wasn't out. So, I mean, you looked at that and that was bodybuilding, you know? And, you know, I looked at some of the guys, like I knew Arnold, like I watched Pumping Iron and all that. And I thought that was obviously awesome. But I looked at those physiques, and I was always kind of an extreme person. Whenever I did something, I wanted to see, like, I was like, okay, like, what's the top of this? Like, what's the most extreme version of this? So like when I looked at the 70s and 80s, I was like, wow, that's impressive. But like when I looked at the guys, like as they got to like the 90s, the early 2000s, I was like, wow, that's impressive. Like they're 50 pounds heavier and just as lean. So that's what really like inspired me to want to be, you know, that size, that freaky monster bodybuilder. I remember being like younger, and when I first started getting into it, I was like, I want to walk into a room and people be like, wow, that's insane. Like, that's just gross. Like, it's beyond like what people can comprehend, you know? So, yeah.
Love that, man. Now, before we kind of wrap up things with your younger years, your childhood, what, you know, outside of kind of like being influenced by Jeff and kind of having a pretty early attraction to bodybuilding, you mentioned you played video games. You mentioned, having some unique pets and stuff like that. Was there anything else that you feel like really shaped your childhood or influenced your childhood outside of Jeff and kind of just having that early exposure to weights?
Those were the main things. I mean, as far back as I can remember, it was animals, bugs, being outside, video games, and bodybuilding. Those were my three things. I mean, still to this day, I'm a pretty big gamer. You know, not as much into the animals, because I just don't really go outside as much, I think. But gaming and bodybuilding was always the thing that kind of like that really shaped my life from the very beginning, as far as I can remember back, you know.
All right. So let's talk about you're in high school. What were your thoughts in terms of, you know, because we all have some sort of thoughts, or we're kind of fed maybe what we're supposed to do post high school. A lot of times it's going off to college, but most of the time we have thoughts of our own in terms of maybe what we want to do as a career or what we want to be when we get older. When you were in high school, what were you thinking about in terms of career, post high school, what you wanted to be when you grew up? Did you have any thoughts like that? What were those thoughts, if so?
Absolutely. I mean, I was from my freshman year in high school is when I started to get into bodybuilding a bit. But then the summer of freshman year is when I really got into it, because, well, about winter break. So think like December 2009, and then summer 2010. From there, I think was when I really got deeply into it, because I remember asking my dad, you know, I was just weight training with him in the morning, but I knew nothing about nutrition, you know, and I didn't know how to eat. You know, I'd probably eat 1 or 2 meals a day. I wasn't really a big eater back then. You know, I just kind of eat when I was hungry. I didn't really eat anything good. I wasn't like too bad of an eater, but I think that's what attributed to me being super skinny, is I just didn't eat a lot of calories. So I remember asking my dad when there was that 2-week break during winter, I was like, can I come to the gym maybe like twice in a day, because I'm not doing anything, and could you help me with my food so I can get a little bit bigger? And he's like, yeah. So during that winter break and then in that summer, I would do 2 workouts a day. He made me this big workout program. It was actually pretty crazy, because I'd probably train 2-3 hours each session, and I didn't feel tired or anything. I really enjoyed training for that long. And between that time, by the time I came back to school my sophomore year, I was about 40 pounds heavier. So I put on a lot of weight very quickly. And I think that's what really like sparked my interest, because I saw the results so quickly, and I started to realize like, wow, like I could be pretty good at this. And when I came back, I mean, everyone, of course, like everyone's like, oh, wow, would you take steroids, blah, blah, blah. But like, you know, it was learning the nutrition. And I think taking the next step in working out and taking it very seriously, and, you know, making sure my weights were going up, getting a little heavier, and focusing more on the muscle, and really like diving deeper rather than just, you know, going in for an hour workout in the morning. But yeah, that was I think when things started to get a lot more serious. As far as when I was in high school, you know, what I thought, once I had that figured out sophomore year, I was just completely focused. I said, I want to be a pro bodybuilder. I want to be Mr. Olympia. Like, that is all I cared about. And the reactions from people were kind of 50-50. You know, my parents were always very supportive of me, which I love them to death. You know, they always supported everything I did. And that was always nice. But, you know, the school counselors, the teachers, they thought it was like, they're like, are you really going to make money doing this? Are you really going to be able to do this? You know, because I'm sure they see a lot of kids say they want to do something, and they're like, oh, wow, that's a weird fad. Like, you're not going to want to do that when you're older. Then the same thing with the kids, like, say it's like 50-50. There were a lot of people like the girlfriends I had in high school always thought it was cool. They were supportive, but like, then there were kids that were like, you can't get that big, you know, like, why would you do that? So it was definitely interesting, like going through high school and being so focused, being so like tunnel vision to one goal, because there weren't a lot of kids like that. You know, when you're that young, like most people don't know what they want to do. Most people don't know what they want to do when they're 25, let alone 16. So it was interesting going through that. Yeah.
So your focus on bodybuilding, even high school. Now on your Instagram, I saw you had like a comparison of one of your earlier competitions this year to your first competition that said your first show was when you were 16 back in 2010. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I
Cool.
did, I might have gotten the time frame messed up a little bit. I think when I was talking about when I put on 40 pounds, that might have been 2009, because I had put on that weight and I was like, wow, like I was really, really good at this. And then I came back. So that would have been the beginning of my sophomore year, probably the fall of 2009. And then I had at my dad's gym, it was a Gold's gym he owned. There's a trainer there named Terrence. He's still my big brother to this day. He's an awesome guy. And we were really good friends, and he saw the weight I put on, and he's like, you should do a bodybuilding competition. I'm like, wow, I can do one this young? Like I was ready to do it. Like I was looking into it, but I didn't know you could compete that young. He's like, yeah, you can compete in the teenage division. So they had teenage bodybuilding classes back then. So yeah, he prepped me into that. He just, basically what I did is I just cut out carbs. So I would eat, the meat, the vegetables, stuff like that, but I wouldn't eat a lot of carbs. And it actually turned out pretty good. I placed third out of like 6 kids. I was the youngest kid there. And that really cemented it. I had so much fun at that show. I saw everyone there. I saw the bigger guys, and I was like, man, like, it's so cool. There was a girl there, as a female bodybuilder. She was twice my size. And I was like, man, like, the fact that a woman can get that big, it was just so inspiring to me. And like everyone there was really nice. And yeah, that really like solidified me wanting to do this.
I love that, man. This is a true bodybuilding story, right? I mean, starting out so young. Now, you graduate high school. At some point you've got to start paying bills. You gotta make some money. You're not going to be making money as a teenage bodybuilder. So what did those post high school years look like in terms of paying the bills, making money, kind of career wise? And then, are you kind of still doing that? Where are we at in terms of like money making?
So I actually was making money from a pretty young age. And the reason why is because, so my dad owned that Gold's gym. It was a big gym. It was like 30,000 square feet, huge. They had a pool, tons of equipment. It was 2 stories, and they had an outside area too. Now it's an EOS, but it's still there. But what happened in the recession in 2008 is when, a lot of businesses went under. A lot of his partners were invested in a lot of things, and they ended up losing a lot of money. So basically, long story short, they sold the gym out from under him. So he kind of got screwed out of that one. And then he opened up another gym called Downtown Fitness, and that was in downtown San Diego. It was a smaller gym. And it was, I would say, more like a personal training gym, but a lot of people used to go there. And he was there all day. I mean, when he owned these gyms, he would literally be there for 16 hours a day. So what he asked me my junior senior year, he asked me if I wanted to come in. I would come in from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. because that's when I was able to drive. And I would just work for a couple hours, and he would pay me for it. So he'd pay me under the table. So I started working when I was in high school, and that worked out nice. So I had a little bit of extra money. And then once I graduated high school, he offered me a position, essentially kind of managing the gym, because he needed another person to kind of help him and watch things. So, I was just kind of doing like books, calling back members that had canceled, see if they wanted to re-sign up, just stuff like that, doing sales. So that was my first introduction to like having a real job. And then, of course, because this just continues to happen, this was kind of like his, he always got screwed by partners with gyms. And that's the thing that always sucked about it. He worked really hard, but he'd have a partner that would kind of like, either, in this case, the partner was taking money out of the business without him knowing. And eventually my dad just walked away from it because he didn't want to deal with it. And then when my dad walked away, the other partner basically just let me go. So at this point, I think there was like a couple months where I didn't work, and I was probably 19 at the time. And I knew I wanted to work in something in fitness, around fitness. And I had I had gotten good at selling memberships and personal training. So I was like, why don't I join a gym and do personal and sell memberships? So the Gold's Gym my dad used to own, it's still Gold's Gym, but he doesn't own it anymore. And I went over there for a job interview and they hired me on the spot. So I was a 19-year-old kid working at a gym, and that was really good money. I mean, for a 19-year-old kid living at home making $3,000-$4,000 a month from commissions and base, I was making like an hourly too. That was a really good job. So that's when I started realizing like there is money in this. It's just not from competing. You have to do like sales or something along those lines. So I did that for a couple years, and I eventually got promoted to the personal. So first I was selling just memberships and then sometimes personal training. And then I got promoted to doing personal training sales. So like I was like the assistant personal training manager, and then eventually the personal training manager, and I would sell personal training packages. And I enjoyed that for a while. I was really good at that. And then my dad was working at a company called AP Wireless. He still works there now. And what they do is they buy cell tower leases. So say like John has a farm, Verizon comes to him and says, hey, we'll take over this 100 by 100 square foot area and we'll put a cell tower here and we'll pay your rent. And he's like, yeah, I'm not using that. Like, pay me $1,000 a month to use that. Why not? What our company does is we go in and we prepay that lease. So we would take over the $1,000 a month and we pay him like $100,000 up front or something. So this was my first job in like a corporate world. And I hated it. I hated every moment of it. I was not good at it. I was not good at talking to these people. I had nothing in common with these people. And I was just horrible at this. And I did that for about a year, and I struggled, and I tried to do my best with it. And I just realized at one point, I was like, this is just not what I want to do. And I'm like, I think I'm like 21 at this point, 22. And I'm like, man, I can't do this. So I stopped doing that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try to go to school. I'm going to go to college, something personal training. I'll figure that out. I start going to school. I hate that too. And I'm terrible in school. I was always terrible in school. I barely finished my senior year. I just can't sit in a classroom and learn about things that I'm just not interested in, And I think that was my struggle even in high school. Is they would teach me things and I'm like, I don't care about this, I already know what I want, like the path that I want to go on. And I feel like none of these things are helping me to that path. And I only did about a year of college, just a community college. And I was like, I'm done with this. This is not what I want to do. So I started working. One of my friends worked at a nightclub. So he worked security in a nightclub. And he's like, why don't you go work at my nightclub? I was like, okay. I think they were making like 20 something an hour with tips. I was like, wow, that's good money. And I was like, what do you do? I'm like, you just stand around and make sure nobody starts fights and pick up cups and, clean up the bar. I'm like, that's not that bad. So I went to interview with the manager there. I got the job, and that I did. I bounced at nightclubs. I was about 24, and that was a lot of fun. I actually really enjoyed doing that. I was getting to the point where I was with tips and stuff. I was working down by the beach bars. I could make like $35, $40 an hour because I took special classes to learn how to catch fake IDs. So I catch like 10 of those a night. It was crazy. I know so many people use them. So that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. And during all this time, I'm still bodybuilding. I'm still competing. So I'm still like working up in that, but I haven't really found like a career yet. I'm just kind of working. And I lived with my parents up until I was about 23, which was insanely helpful. They're awesome. So like I'm making this money and I'm just kind of putting it away, saving it. I don't really spend a lot of money on anything, just food and bodybuilding stuff. And they were really supportive, but they ended up moving to Florida when I was 23. And I was dating who is now my wife at the time. And her name's Chandler. And I was like, well, my parents are moving. I got to move and find a place. And we ended up finding a little place down by the beach. It was like this tiny little box, like 500 square feet. It was a 1-bedroom, but it was nice. We liked it. And during this time, I'm just working security. We competed during our first show together. This is around like 2017, and everything is good. And so I did a show when I was 23, and I think that was the first show that I feel like I got in really good condition. You know, I won the overall. That was my first overall that I won. And I started getting messages from people saying like, hey, do you do personal training? And I was like, well, not really. I've never really done like training online, but like, hey, if you want me to do it, like I'll try it. So I started building up clients. And from about 23 till I was about 25, I started building up clients. And I was still working security at the time. And I told myself, I was like, okay, if I get 50 clients, I'll quit security. And yeah, around that time, I think it was 24. I got 50 clients and I was like, I'm out. And that's what I've been doing since then is just training people. And now I've got usually a roster of about 100 plus people. It's amazing. I get to work from home. You know, I get to do what I love to do and help people out with their goals. And I have people from lifestyle people to competitive bodybuilders. You know, I have some mixed martial arts fighters. I have people all around the spectrum. So it's really cool doing that. But that's kind of how my like career went, if that makes sense, until I got to this.
I love that, man. That's kind of what I asked for. And I just kind of love the thoroughness of just kind of like, okay, from high school to where we're at today, because again, you know, there is money in bodybuilding, but sometimes you have to, you know, kind of get smart with how you're going to make that money if you're not one of the top IFBB pros. So let's get back into competing then. So we talked about your first show. Why don't you talk about when you started competing in the NPC? You mentioned you were 23, you got your first overall win. So why don't you just talk about the evolution of your competition history, some of the highlights, and then we'll kind of go from there.
So as I told you before, I did my first NPC show at 16 years old. And then from there, I decided I was gonna take some time off, do an off season and grow. And I did my next show at 19. And 19 was actually, I had if you know Boston Lloyd, he was prepping me for that show, for those shows. He's a really good friend of mine. It's horrible to have seen him pass, you know, this last month or so. But he was one of my closest friends. Still to this day was one of my closest friends. And he prepped me when I was 19 for 3 different shows. And I won the teenage overall 2 of those. And then I got second at the California teen like state show. So it was really awesome. Like I was winning those shows. I was really pumped. And he kind of gave me more of the advanced side of bodybuilding. So he was teaching me more of, you know, more advanced nutrition, more advanced supplementation, more advanced training. So he taught me a lot. He kind of took me under his wing and really showed me how to bring my physique to the next level. And from there, I hooked up with a guy. He told me to go to him, a guy named John O'Regan. And he was Dallas McCarver's first trainer. He trained Nick Trigili. He trains a lot of like younger guys and just makes them freaks. And he put, like 40 pounds on me in like a couple years. And he was a very good trainer. He was an awesome guy. And I did a show with him when I was 22 and I won my class, but I was just shy of the overall. Still, I was over the moon. I was really happy about it. You know, that was a really good showing. That was my first men's open showing. So I won the heavyweight and then second in the overall. And then I re-hooked up with Boston when I was 23. And that's when I did, it was just the shows are called muscle contest shows out in the West Coast. And I did one of those shows when I was 23 and he helped prep me for that. And I won the overall there. He brought me in great condition. And that was my first like overall that I ever won. So it was awesome. And then from there, I did the California State show after that. And that was some really good competition. I placed 3rd in my class there. It's kind of a little bump back, but you know, it was okay. Still just kind of learning my body and learning how to peak things and get things better. And then from there, my next show when I was 25, and I tried to do the California State show again. And this is when I was working with, I started working with Blue Taylor, and Blue Taylor is currently my coach. And I've been working with him for years now. He's awesome. You know, me and him work really well together. He's amazing coach, amazing friend. And I won my class there. and then again second in the overall. So I'm like starting to like work my way up, but I'm like hitting a roadblock where I'm like, man, like, am I really like gonna be able to do this? Because this is like I'm like kind of getting there, but not quite. And then I decided, and then that was 2019, and then obviously the next year COVID hit, started to shut down gyms. That was kind of a wonky year. Business was a little weird, and then training obviously was a little weird. We actually we had a house in San Diego, me and my wife Chandler, and we built a whole home gym so that we could train for a couple months while the gyms were closed. So we were doing that, still doing the training and everything, even though it was kind of slow, but everything was okay. And then the next show I did was the 2020 USA's, and they moved that from July all the way to December. And instead of being in Vegas, it was in Arizona. So that was really that was a hectic, crazy prep. And the even crazier part about that is, with COVID and everything going on, we were kind of getting sick of California just because of that. They were just continuing to close things down, and it was getting frustrating. So we said, you know what? We were 3 weeks out from USA, me and her both, and we were like, you know what? We're going to move. And we were looking at Florida, we were looking at Montana, and then we were looking at Vegas. And we're like, well, Montana is a little far and like out of the way. My parents lived in Florida, so we were thinking about moving there, but Florida is 2,000 miles away from San Diego. So if we ever want to go back, it's kind of a hassle. So we're like, why don't we go to Vegas? And I had a couple friends there. So we're like, okay. So we picked our stuff up, threw it in the back of my truck, and we moved to Vegas 3 weeks out. And that was a very good decision, because Flex Lewis opened Dragon's Lair. We didn't even know about it before we moved here. And this eventually became a really big hotspot for bodybuilding. So I love it here. Vegas is amazing. And then obviously the cost of living is a little more acceptable than San Diego. I did the 2020 USA, and me and my wife actually both placed fourth in our class. And I was over the moon about this, because my first national show, placed top 5. I'm like, this was good. The only thing that sucked is I went down to doing light heavies. I usually competed as a heavyweight for a couple of years, and I pushed myself down to being a light heavy. I was about 195 pounds. I definitely lost a considerable amount of muscle over dieting and doing that, but it was a very good learning experience, realizing I'm like, I can't push this hard, otherwise I end up losing muscle. So that was good, but I still placed really well, and I was really excited about that. And everything's good. And then this last year, so that was 2020, end of 2020, and then 2021 rolls around. I'm training with Dominic Cardone. He's a good friend of mine, and I'm just starting to put on muscle like crazy. And Vegas was a really good place. I had Dragon's Lair. I didn't have any distractions, so I put on a lot of muscle there. And from there, 2021, I didn't compete, and then I started my prep. I was going to do USA this year, but I thought to myself, I'm like, I usually grow better during preps just because I'm more focused. So why don't I just do like a 10-month prep? So I started prepping in like October of last year. And that's where you've seen me. I did the San Diego show this year, just San Diego Classic. It was a little smaller show. I won that show. And I did the Cutler Classic. That was a really big show, really competitive. And I won the overall there. And that was like, I'm on a really good, feeling really good right now, basically. But those are the shows that I've done over the years. And the crazy thing is so I weighed in at 195 at USA's 2020. At this last show, I weighed in at 218, and probably just about as lean in both of those shows. So I'm really excited about showing that next level physique at USA.
Excellent, man. I love that. So, and we're going to get into kind of, I want to get into some of the competitions that you've already done this year and talk about what your plans are going forward. But before we do that, let's talk about your coach, Blue Taylor. This is something that I bring up often on the podcast, coaching, because I feel like somebody that's in your position, top NPC competitors, the IFBB pros that I bring on, people are going to listen to you guys because you have a platform, you're competing, you're in it. And I just feel like because of social media, there's just a lot of craziness in terms of coaching. And when you're new to something, you don't really know where to start. So you get on Instagram, you get on Google, you get on YouTube, and there's just so much information. So first of all, my first question is, why Coach Taylor? Why did you initially decide to go with him? And how has your guys' connection kind of grown over the years? And what has he kind of brought to the table for you as a competitor, as a bodybuilder?
So I started working with Blue around those last shows, like 2017. When I was doing those shows when I was about 23, and Boston had coached me. And Boston actually recommended I go to him. So he recommended two guys. I forget who the other guy was. But I messaged Blue first, and I messaged him at like 12, like midnight. Like I was just expecting to talk to him the next day. I messaged him at midnight over Facebook, and he responds to me within seconds and goes, "Call me." I'm like, "Oh, wow. Like that was quick." So I called him. We had about an hour-long phone call. I mean, the passion this guy has for bodybuilding, the knowledge he has, and the practical application he has for bringing each person in their own way and learning your body is just incredible. Like he has an eye for this that I've never seen anybody have. And beyond that, he is the most responsive coach I've ever had in terms of like speed, in terms of like detail. I mean, he's on another level. He's like OCD to the max. To give you an example, when he does his check-ins, he'll stay up for 2 to 3 days straight. And I mean, no drugs, no Adderall, no nothing. This man just stays up for 2 to 3 days straight doing check-ins. And he's got clients all over the world. So, he's doing phone calls at 3 a.m., at noon, at 3 p.m. So he's all over the place, and he's still able, and he's got 300 plus clients, and he gives each person the same attention and care as the last. So that's one thing that I really liked about him. But beyond that, because of our relationship, we've become very, very close friends. He's helped me with a lot of personal life situations. He's been there for a lot of my life, and I almost consider him like a second dad. So Blue is a really, really good guy. But in terms of so give me an example, like when we first did our shows together, he was he's always like this with everybody, but he's about condition, be as shredded as possible. Now, one thing that I hadn't learned about my body yet is when I drop my calories really low and I start to increase my cardio really high, I have a very fast metabolism as it is. And I never realized how easy it was to lose muscle. Because I had always kind of gone into preps the same way, where I'm like, okay, I got to drop my food, I got to increase my cardio. It's just standard, and Blue was that way too, until we kind of learned my body. And that's what happened when we did the 2020 USA, is we pushed really, really hard. We were also trying to make a weight class too, because I was only going to be like 200 pounds in the heavies if I didn't drop down to go into a light heavy. And we learned from that prep that we're like, we can't push too hard because it's very, very easy for my body to lose muscle. And if I don't have that pop to my muscle, my shape and my structure doesn't really show. And that's what we did this year is, I don't think we went below 200 grams of carbs, if that. We might have been even higher than that now that I think about it. It makes things really easy. I don't even have to think about my macros or calories. But we kept food really high. I don't think we ever went past like 45 minutes of cardio during the preps. And my body just looks so much better, so much fuller, so much healthier, so much more like the look that I was like, wow, like that looks like a physique that could turn pro, rather than just looking like I'm super shredded, but just skinny. But again, he's the type of guy that he's not a my way or the highway. He'll listen to you. He'll take feedback from you personally on how you feel about something. And then also he takes feedback from your body. So, it's crazy to see the changes that we've made from the end of 2020, the USA's, to now, because I put on so much more muscle, and then just brought a much better package, like overall balanced package to the stage of size, of condition, of proportion. We brought up a lot of lagging muscle groups too. So he's just a great coach all around, and really knows his stuff.
So in regards to picking a coach, right? Kind of going back to what I said just a little bit ago with social media, and there's so much information out there. You being a coach, you having a coach, what are your kind of suggestions for people that are looking to find a coach? And do you feel like from the get-go, as soon as somebody gets into bodybuilding, they want to start competing, should they get a coach? Should they maybe go a few competitions on their own to learn their body, learn how things go? You know, where are you at with that, Jasen, personally, in terms of when should somebody get a coach?
I am a big believer that you should get a coach from day one, because if you look back at what I talked about of my learning experience, I had a coach from day one. My dad was my coach. You know, I never lifted a weight by myself. So I always had someone there telling me that knew better than I did, telling me like, this is the right way to do it. This is how you do it. You know, this is the wrong way to do it. And I think that's what progressed me so quickly. You know, I didn't have to go through that trial and error. And I see a lot of kids nowadays, you know, whether they're teenagers, whether they're in their 20s or 30s, you know, just people that are beginning, and they're trying to do the very beginner steps, and they have no idea how to do that. You know, it's like me, if I want to be a programmer and I buy a laptop, I'm like, I'm going to start programming. And I look at the laptop, I'm like, I have no idea where to start. That's where a lot of people are starting in the gym. They just they get a gym membership and they step in the gym and they're like, all right, I'm going to get big. And I'm like, they have no direction of where to go. So I'm a firm believer in hire someone from the get-go. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your money. You know, get someone to fast track that progress for you. That I think that's what helped me kind of skip through that and make a lot of progress in getting to where I am today. I think a coach is really good. And then in terms of finding a coach, you know, my coach Blue Taylor is really big on what he calls the resume. So if you go to a coach and they don't have, you know, a list of clients, of transformations, of people that they work with that you can create that are credible, you know, you shouldn't hire that person. It's just like if you go into a job interview, say you're an accountant, and I mean, are you going to want to hire the kid that just came out of college, that just has a college degree, or are you going to hire the guy that's 40 years old, that's been doing this for years, that's worked with private accounting, with public accounting, you know, and he's done all these different things? You're going to want to hire the person with better experience, because you know, he knows more. That's kind of the way we think about it. You know, some people might think differently, but I think that's a good place to start, is just seeing like what they've done as a coach so far. You know, everyone starts somewhere. So, you know, sometimes people do need a chance. You know, they just start and they kind of need to just build up a few clients before they're able to do that. There is definitely a time and a place for that. But I think for most people that are new to this, they want to hire someone that knows what they're doing, that has already worked with a bunch of people. And I think the other aspect of it too is like, you want to hire someone you like. You know, this is a very close, intimate relationship you have with a trainer and a client. You know, you don't want to hire someone that you guys just don't get along. You know, you guys don't get along with the process or anything like that. So I think that's a big thing, is just personalities meshing. And, you know, I've been lucky enough where every coach I've ever had has been amazing. They've always been really good to me. I've always been really close with them. Everyone I work with, I'm still friends with. So it's been good, you know.
Great
but
advice. Yeah. What's that, Jasen?
I said that would be my recommendation for someone who's, you know, beginning into this.
Perfect. Absolutely. Okay. So, in regards to your kind of like training style or training philosophy, in terms of like how you train yourself in the gym, what does that kind of look like? And has that evolved over the years?
Yes. So if we go back to the very beginning, when I first started training, when I first started training with my dad early in the morning, when I was a teenager, it was very basic stuff, you know, learning how to bench press, learning to use machines, learning how to squat, learning just the basics of how to work out. And I didn't really think about the reps, the sets, or anything like that, because I just followed him around and did what he did. And then when I put on all that weight when I was a kid, when I was from my like freshman to sophomore year, that's when he made that training program for me. And that was a very high volume training program. And that was when I started to really learn. I'm like, okay, like this is the amount of sets I should do. This is the reps that I should do. And I started to kind of like learn about that. And I did that type of training for a long time where I trained 2-3 hours. You know, I do 50, 60 sets for a body part, very, very high volume, very different than most people would do. And that worked for a while until I got to a certain point where I feel like it started to have diminishing returns. And then I started to go to more of like a traditional bodybuilding split where I would train, you know, 5 or 6 days a week, you know, individual body parts. And then I would train for about an hour. So I do like 15 sets, 16 sets, or however many like that, depending on the body part. And I train that way. And that worked really well for a while. And that's kind of how I trained for a bit. In terms of like heavy, I trained like relative heaviness, but not too heavy. You know, I was never really a strong kid. I think the most I've ever squatted is like 495. The most I've ever benched was like, I benched 4 plates, so 405, but even for me, that's not that heavy. You know what I mean? I think for some people it's heavy, but for me, it's not like anything crazy. And I didn't train like that. I didn't train with those weights all the time. That was more of just like, oh, can I do this? You know? So the weights that I trained with were more like what I perceived as heavy enough for me to make progress. And then I linked up when I was about 22, 23. I linked up with a guy named Eric Raposa, one of my closest friends to this day. And I trained with him. I never really had training partners after my dad. I usually trained on my own. This was my first like real training partner that I trained with consistently. I trained with him for years, and he was an old school bodybuilder. He's a little older guy in his 50s, but just incredible physique, crazy dense muscle. He's a professional bodybuilder, and he was very much about high intensity, high weight. I mean, he really pushed me to my limit. A lot of force reps, high rep sets or low reps. I mean, we did everything, but the main thing was like very high intensity and very heavy weight. And I think he kind of broke that plateau of like, how hard can I really train? So he taught me a lot. And that was over at, it used to be World's Gym San Diego. Now it's called The Gym. But it's a really big bodybuilder gym. Sergio trains there. A bunch of pro bodybuilders train there. It's a really awesome facility. And I trained like that for a while. And then I moved from San Diego to Vegas, you know, a year and a half ago. And I trained with a guy for a little bit there. And then eventually I just started training on my own after a while. And I started to experiment a little bit with the way that I was training. And I don't know if you know him, Justin Shire.
He's been a guest on the podcast before he actually even turned pro. So
he's a really good guy. And I talked to him because I met him originally at the USA's in 2020. And then I saw him progress and turn pro, you know, the following year in nationals. And just the progress that he made is just amazing. And if you ask him how he made that progress, he'll say, I changed my training. And I remember asking him right around when I started my prep, I was like, Justin, like, how do you train? Like what did you change? And he's like, honestly, like everything. So he taught me to train with more emphasis on slowing down the reps. So coming up like normals, but not locking out. Pause at the top, 3 seconds down. Pause at the bottom, up, squeeze, 3 seconds down, pause. But that type of tempo and that type of focus and training, I think really brought my training again to another level, because I think I was taught to train with such high intensity with as much weight as I could that I kind of lost the feeling of feeling the muscle. And I mean, I had to decrease my weights by like 30-40% on like everything, but it was a very humbling experience. But he actually made me a workout program. He was nice enough to do that. And I followed this thing the entirety of my prep. And that I attribute to a lot of the progress that I made. And I feel like I have a denser, fuller look to my muscles because of this. And he learned that because of Matt Jansen. That's how Matt has a lot of his guys train. And I swear by this type of training. I think a lot of people train way too jerky. They lose the negative on a lot of the movements, and they're not controlled on everything. So I think slow and controlled, as heavy as possible while doing those type of reps, and thinking the way that every rep matters. You know, those last 2 reps, don't want to hurry them up and be jerky just because you want to get them over with. Like every rep from rep 1 to rep 12 or whatever you're doing should be exactly the same. So I think that's been a huge in my physique, and that's the way that I'm training now, and that's the way that I will train for the foreseeable future.
Love that, man. And, you know, obviously Nick Walker, when you said that, you know, the way that you're starting to train now, Nick Walker is somebody, like, if you watch his YouTube, I mean, it's just, it's
Same way.
it's under control. It's mind to muscle connection. It's all business. It's all focus. And I'm a huge proponent of that myself. And like you said, Justin Shire, like, he's recently got his YouTube going, and it's just, I mean, there's different training styles for different people. There's different strokes for different folks, but man, especially if you're somebody younger, you're just getting into training, like, watch Justin Shire, watch Nick Walker's YouTube. I feel like if you're starting out and you don't even really know how to train, like, those two guys are great examples of foundational training that is going to give you not only results today, but it's going to really help you with that longevity of competing in bodybuilding. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think that's huge that a lot of people don't think about, is like, you know, injuries set you back. You know, you get a bad injury, you're out for 6 months, and that's 6 months that you could have been making progress. You know, not only that, but you're not going to be where you were when you started. So you tear something in your elbow or whatever, you tear a bicep, you know, you're out for 6 months. You're going backwards for that period of time. So now you got to get back to where you were and then make progress. So that might set you a year behind. You know, I see a lot of people train and I'm like, man, like, you're going to get hurt one day. Like, that's just not smart. And I think that way of training, again, yeah, like you said, longevity, and there is a life after bodybuilding too. You know, as much as I love Ronnie Coleman, the intensity that he has, and I don't think he regrets anything, but at the same time, like, I don't want to be getting back surgeries and being in a wheelchair and all that stuff. Like, I want to live my normal life. You know, if I'm 45 and I'm done bodybuilding and I shrink down a little bit, I want to be able to go on hikes. I want to be able to run. I want to be a normal person. I want to be in pain all my life just because I wanted to squat 600 pounds because I have an ego, you know? So I think that's really big, especially learning that younger. And I think I was fortunate enough, you know, knock on wood, I haven't had any injuries training. The only injuries I had were from football. But I think because I learned to train pretty smart, you know, from a younger age, that I never had any injuries in the gym.
Very cool. All right. So let's get back into this year, 2022. You've had a couple awesome showings at your first two competitions this year. I want to ask you, just because, you know, you said Jay Cutler is kind of like your all-time favorite bodybuilder. He was a big influence when you were first in the magazines and stuff like that. And then you had the opportunity to win the overall at his show in Vegas. It was just last week, right?
Yep. It was last weekend, last Saturday.
Yeah. So, and I saw a picture on your Instagram, you know, he was there on stage with you presenting the trophy. I mean, you know, it's not turning pro, but to be able to win like your idol's bodybuilding competition, I mean, was that pretty cool? Is that kind of like the highlight up to this point in terms of competing?
Yes, that was the most exciting, fun show that I've ever won. You know, beyond the prep going smooth, just being on that stage with so many good athletes, with people that, you know, guys there have won overalls. I mean, the guy that placed third in my weight class won an overall 2 weeks before. So it was very competitive. And any one of those guys could have won an overall any other show, but we all decided to compete against each other and really push ourselves. And doing a show like that with Jay there, you know, seeing him walk backstage. And when I got off stage, you know, I got to talk to him for like 15 minutes. You know, it was a very, very like surreal experience. And, you know, like you said, it wasn't turning pro, but man, it was the next best thing. And I think for me too, because of how I felt not about my placing, but kind of like the poor physique that I feel like I presented in 2020, that was kind of the motivation I needed to be like, okay, like, I can do this, you know, because I felt like I kind of took a step backwards there. Even though my placing was very good, my physique took a step backwards. And now I feel like I took 3 steps forward with my physique and the way that I look. And I was, regardless if I had won that show or not, I was very proud of the physique that me and Blue had or was able to show. And I was very happy with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, what are your plans going forward this year in terms of competing? You're planning on USA's in July. Is that correct?
So as of right now, USA's in July. I'm giving my body a little bit of a break. I've just been kind of relaxing, eating for the last week. I'm going to start tightening up my diet a little more this week. But I don't feel burnt out at all, which is a first for me, because I usually, and that probably is attributed to the over dieting, I'd usually get like 2 weeks out from the show. I'm like, man, like I can't wait for this to be over. I'm so tired. But I went into these 2 shows, like I felt great the entire time. I never felt bad. I was just, and by the time the show was over, I'm like, all right, when's the next one? Like I'm excited, and that normally doesn't happen. So it's been a very good prep, but USA will be the next one. That's about 15 weeks from this Saturday, like 2 days ago Saturday. And so we have plenty of time. I'm still really lean, obviously, and we're just going to slowly bring things down. But I want to take advantage of the rebound of that too. So we're going to increase my calories for a little bit, put on a little bit of muscle, and then about 10 weeks out is when we'll start coming down for USA. Now, depending on how I do at USA, so I told my wife this. I said, if I win, obviously I'll be done. I'll focus on a pro show if I can win. If I place really high, let's say if I place like second or third, and I just shy of that, I might try to do North Americans or nationals or something like that. Since I'm already lean, I'm in prep, and it won't be that much longer. And I usually feel, as of right now, I feel pretty good prepping for this long. We'll see how I feel then. But that's kind of the idea right now. Is fingers crossed. Like I'm hoping to go into USA and win. But there's a lot of really good athletes there. You never know what will happen. Sometimes a crazy dude shows up, where people that have been there for a while, they make insane progress and they destroy everyone, like Justin. I'm just going to go in, do my best, and then however the judges see it, we'll go from there.
So, ever since you were a teenager, you wanted to be a pro bodybuilder. That's kind of like, that's like your calling, your path, your passion. However long that takes, whether it's at USA's this year or North Americans later this year, if it's, further down the road, once you do attain that IFBB Pro status, like, do you have kind of like a vision for your bodybuilding career? And if so, what would that be?
Absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of where I want to be, my first goal would be to obviously to place well at a pro show. So I don't expect to go into my first pro show and win. A lot of guys do that, but I don't think I'm some genetically gifted freak. I've always been kind of the person that slowly puts on muscle, that slowly makes progress over time. So I'd probably turn pro. I've realized in the past, if I take too long of time off, I kind of lose my motivation, my tunnel vision. So if I did turn pro, I would probably do a show within a year or around that time. Maybe if I won in July, I might do a show like next year, like October or something. So give me enough time to make some progress and then do the prep and everything. But again, like the times that I put up that I've taken 2-3 years off, I'll make progress in the beginning, and then it's kind of slows down because I get demotivated because I don't see a goal in sight, and that's a long time to wait in between shows. So what I've realized is that doing a show each year will keep me motivated and fired up and ready to go for the next one. And I mean, obviously, as you can see, like guys like Brett Wilkin and Nick Walker, like they're doing shows every year, maybe sometimes multiple shows, or Ian Lair, and they're making progress every year. So there's no reason you shouldn't be able to make progress while obviously staying like in the limelight with competing. But the goal would be to do well at a pro show, eventually win a pro show, and then my ultimate goal is to be on the Olympia stage. And then from there, everything's just icing on the cake. If I could win the Olympia, that would be amazing, but I want to be on that Olympia stage, whether I place 16th or first. That is my ultimate goal. That is what my focus is. And that's, once I get there, I'm just going to live my life the way I want to. Doesn't matter after that.
I love it. I love it, dude. We're going to wrap it up here in a couple minutes. Before we do, what's something, starting out so young in bodybuilding, and you're 26, right?
28.
28. Okay. You're very young. But you've been in bodybuilding for a lot of years. What's something or a couple things that you kind of wish you maybe would have known in the beginning of this bodybuilding experience, or would have known a little bit more about in the beginning, that maybe you can share with some of the people that are listening or watching this to kind of help them?
I think the biggest thing that I wish I had focused on when I was younger was my training. I was very much like, kind of like, okay, like training's like the last most important thing. Like you go to the gym, you train heavy, you make sure the muscle gets pumped, whatever. I don't think I took training as seriously as I did, my diet, my supplementation. And I was always very, very interested in nutrition and supplementation. Those were the two things that I really, really enjoyed about bodybuilding. And I thought that really separated bodybuilding because, in every sport you train. So I think training was kind of the most like dull thing to talk about. But again, over this last year, changing my training has made such a huge change to my body. And I would tell someone that's younger, focus on everything. Every single thing is important. There's not one aspect of this that you can leave out if you want to be the best. And if you want to be the best version of yourself, so I think, training, diet, and supplementation all go hand in hand. And if you're missing any one of those things, you won't be able to be the best version of yourself or be at the top of the pros if that's your goal.
All right. So in terms of progressing as a bodybuilder, how important, Jasen, is environment? You go from San Diego, you move to Las Vegas, training at the Dragon's Lair, and anybody that knows anything about bodybuilding, that's kind of like the new Mecca, Las Vegas, right? There's all kinds of amazing bodybuilding gyms opening up and amazing athletes that are there, Olympians. But how important is being in an environment like Las Vegas, Dragon's Lair, to progression? Do you feel like that is a part of the nutrition, the training, the supplementation just as important, or not so much?
I'm glad you brought that up because I think I did miss that. I think that is just as important as that. I've trained in a lot of different gyms. I've trained by myself. I've trained with other people. I think everyone is different in this sense. Some people like the dungeon, like, stay away from people. They like to just kind of be on their own and kind of go in their little hiding place. And that's just the way their mind works. Other people like to be in a commercial gym and 24-hour fitness, be around people, people be like, yeah, you look great. Or like just being social. I think I'm kind of in the middle of that sometimes. Sometimes I feel like hiding away for a little bit. And then sometimes I'm a very, very social person and I love talking to people and being around people. But I think for the majority of people that are trying to get to that level, having a support group, having that atmosphere of people that are very serious, I think is extremely important. I think it is just as important as the diet and the training and everything. If you don't have that, if you don't have people around you that are continually pushing you to be to that next level, even if we think back like Dorian Yates, he's the most famous guy of like, he goes to Birmingham. He's got this little tiny dungeon gym, underneath. You walk down the stairs, you do that. But he had a support group. He had his wife back then. He had his training partner. He had all his people helping him out. So while it was, very like lonesome, like dungeon style training, he still had those people around him. He still had that atmosphere. He created that atmosphere that he felt was most conducive to his growth. So I think you have to find the atmosphere that's most conducive to your growth. Now, I love San Diego. I love the San Diego gym I used to train at, but I will say, and everyone else will say this too, that is very serious. It's more of an influencer gym now. It's more of like the people like, and that's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. People like to do like, they just want to look good for the camera. They want to look good for the beach, and that's awesome. But I think Dragon's Lair is more of like, I go into Dragon's Lair, I see an Olympian over here, I see, another top pro over here, I see another top amateur over here, I see Flex Lewis, who has been at the peak forever, and I also see a lot of good business people there, people that are very successful in business, which also, inspires me to be better in my business. So it's a very, it's almost intimidating sometimes because you go in there. I mean, sometimes I'm the only amateur bodybuilder in there because there's so many pros and so many high level pros. So it's very humbling, and it helps me want to be to that next level. And I think this atmosphere for me personally is most conducive to my growth. And I absolutely love Dragon's Lair for sure. Now I do sometimes train at, there's a place called LVAC out here in Vegas, Las Vegas Athletic Club, I think it's called. and they're awesome gyms. I sometimes go there. It's a little closer to my house, and maybe I would just want to kind of be alone and train there sometimes because I don't really know anyone there, and just kind of keep my head down, put my headset on. But most of the time I'm at Dragon's Lair.
Cool. Love it, man. Okay. I got 2 more questions for you. First one, the tattoos on your hands, man. What's all that about? I've got my hands tatted up and it hurt like crazy getting them. So what's up with your tattoos?
So I think this goes back to me, again, being the type of person I like to be different. You don't see anyone with just their hands done. So for me, this is actually my first tattoo. This is Zeus. I'm not sure if you can really see it. As I said before, my dad is Greek. He was born and raised in Greece, and he taught me a lot about Greek mythology, and I love Greek mythology. So I decided Zeus on this hand, Medusa on this hand. This was my second tattoo. And the reason I tattooed my hands is because I wanted tattoos, but I didn't want to mess up my bodybuilding career. Because, if you get tattoos on you, it covers up the muscle, the definition. So I didn't want to put it in a place that I'm showing the muscle. So I was like, why don't I just do my hands? And I was like, I don't really see anyone like doing just their hands. Most people will like connect it to a sleeve or whatever else. Like most people, their hands are like the last thing they tattoo. So I got that done. I have some on my ankle too. They're the Hermes wings from like the Hermes shoes. If you know that story. So it's just Greek mythology. I really like them. But yeah, I love tattoos. When I'm done competing, I'm going to be tattooed everywhere. My wife loves tattoos. She got her whole sleeve done. She got her neck done. So tattoos are really cool. I think they're a good way of expressing yourself. Just like our physique, it's just something it's on your body. People can see it, and they're like, it's a way to express, the type of person you are.
They tell a story, right?
Exactly. Just like your physique tells a story, your tattoos tell a story, just like a scar tells a story,
For sure. All right. Last question. And then I'm going to kind of give you the platform, Jasen, to share any final words or thoughts. So on the final question I have for you is, what has bodybuilding taught you, or what has bodybuilding given you?
Oh man, bodybuilding has taught me so many things. I mean, just to go over the general part of it, I mean, discipline is the biggest thing. I feel like if you can be disciplined enough to do a bodybuilding prep, or even just follow a diet, it doesn't even have to be prepping for a show, just follow a diet of some kind, a workout regimen. I think that type of discipline can be transferred to anything else. I think if you do it correctly and you have the right mindset, it really is transferable to any aspect of your life. And I think that's what helped me a lot in creating my business, as well as having that discipline from bodybuilding. No one telling me that I have to go to the gym, that I have to diet or do anything. That's kind of how my business is. Nobody tells me that I have to text my clients back or do check-ins or anything like that, or advertise and make sure I'm getting more clients and making sure I'm making enough money to pay my bills. It's something I have to do on my own. So I think that's one thing is the discipline of it. Sorry, what was the other part of it? You said, what has it taught me? And then what was?
Or I just said, what has bodybuilding taught you or given you? That's it.
Yeah. So that's a big one. Bodybuilding has given me everything. I mean, I would not be in this position today without bodybuilding. I have my wife because I was into bodybuilding. I live in a beautiful home. I have my 2 dogs. Like I have enough money to live comfortably. I'm not rich by any means, but I'm very comfortable. It's given, I mean, all my friends, my connections, I've met amazing people through bodybuilding. I would say bodybuilding has really given me 99% of my life. And again, not just from competing, but just being in that atmosphere and going out of my way to help people and teach people as much as I can. And the same thing, like a lot of people going out of their way to teach me, what they know. I don't regret anything that I've done. I think this was the best course that I could have steered my life into. And I'm very, very happy with the outcome and everything that has come with it.
Absolutely, man. Bodybuilding gets a pretty bad rap, especially nowadays, with different, deaths and different things like that. But, when you really take a step back, and if you've been in bodybuilding for an extended period of time, it's an absolutely beautiful sport. and it really can teach you so much about yourself, so much about other people, and so much about life if you are open to it. If you want to be the person that's kind of just the meathead, lifts weights and yells and screams and is a jerk, I mean, whatever. But really, if you really go into the depths of bodybuilding and everything that it can give you, and there's evolutions to it, man, it's so beautiful. Wouldn't you agree, Jasen?
100%. I think you hit the nail on the head with all of that. It's amazing what you can get out of it if you really, not just, again, it's not just weightlifting, it's not just dieting, it's an art form. It's something that brings a lot of people out of depressions, out of bad relationships. Like it's a way for people to create positive energy, you know? It's just, again, I wouldn't have my life any different than it is now. I think bodybuilding was the best thing for me. You know, there are times where it's hard, you know, I mean, we all have our mental struggles. And I think in any path that I would have taken, I would have had, you know, doubts or like, oh, like, should I really be doing this or that? I mean, to be honest with you, I almost quit bodybuilding last year because I didn't think I had it in me to do it anymore. You know, I look at guys that are like, you know, guys come up there 3-4 years, they're top pros. I'm like, man, like it's taken me 10 years just to get here. But I don't think it's always about that. You know, it's not about, you know, always winning shows and being successful in that sense. It's about just being happy, you know? And I think that happiness comes before having any success in bodybuilding. If you're not happy with you and yourself, you know, it doesn't really matter what you win in bodybuilding or how big you get or how shredded you get. You're not going to be happy to begin with. I think that's where you're coming back to where you said, like, bodybuilding sometimes gets a bad rap because it gives people, you know, mental health issues. Obviously, we talk about the drug aspect of it too, and the deaths. You know, people like to link that together. You know, and that's, I mean, that's with anything. You know, any sport, anything. I mean, talk about people working on Wall Street doing lines of cocaine just to stay awake, and you know, they make $500,000 a year, but then they die from a heart attack because of all the drugs they've done. So it's just like anything. You know, you use it for the positive outlet of it, and not the negative.
Absolutely. All right, Jasen. I just kind of want to give you the platform here. If you have any shout outs, any sponsors, you know, anything that you kind of want to share in closing, the floor is yours. And then once you're done, I will do the outro, and that'll be a wrap. Okay.
I mean, you covered pretty much everything. I don't have any sponsors or anything like that. You know, my coach Blue, my wife Chandler, like all the people that support me, I always appreciate you guys. And it was really cool to get to come on here and talk about my life. And you know, I love bodybuilding, and it's cool to be a part of this, you know.
For sure, man. Well, I just want to tell you, Jasen, thank you so much for coming on, man. I'm looking forward. I've had some guys on that are gunning for the USAs, and hopefully we'll get a few more guys, because that's kind of my passion is, yeah, I want to have some of the top IFBB pros on here, but I want people like you that are on the come up, because a lot of us can relate to you guys more than we can the top IFBB pros. And it's just great to be able to give you guys your shine and your due, because you're grinding just like the top IFBB pros are. So thank you so much, Jasen, for coming on. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. All of you who are tuning into another episode of Behind the Muscle podcast, I just want to say once again, thank you so much to you guys. If it wasn't for you, the podcast wouldn't exist. A couple quick things I would just ask all of you, if you wouldn't mind doing, hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you haven't done so already. Super important, because I release all these episodes first on YouTube, and then I'll distribute them to the other podcast platforms. And then the second favor I'd ask, please take this episode with Jasen, share it on your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag Jasen, tag Behind the Muscle, so that we know that you listened specifically to this episode and found great value in it. When you guys share this episode on your Instagram stories and your other social media platforms, it's also a great way for other people to find the podcast. People are going to listen, and people are going to be positively impacted through the stories of the athletes and the coaches that are sharing their stories. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.